number 5. Thank you to everybody that sent in their answers. Hopefully you've all gotten an email from me with your feedback. And now we'll take a few minutes to go through how the rules applied to this week's situation. So although I know this week's had a lot of rules that applied, and so it was sort of quite complicated. So we'll try and go through relatively slowly and I'll try and address any points or possible misconceptions that were brought up in the answers so that everything is clear for everybody. So if we just remind you what the scenario looked like, hopefully you can see that. So we had our friends blue and yellow, and this time we're both sailing downwind with spinnakers. Blue is initially clear astern, she gets an overlap then to leeward of yellow, and in the conditions there's a big gust, she then broaches, loses control and luffs into yellow, and there's an incident that causes some contact. We had a big long description of the incident, so it was up to you to pull out what the relevant facts are, and then how the rules applied. So we had a lot of possible rules that could be broken here. So we've just looking at that scenario, even before we've even had a look at the words, these are the rules that should have been going through your head. So things like rule 11, windward leeward, because we obviously had the boats being overlapped. There was some questions about their proper course, and the clue for that was the direction to the next mark is given to you. And then we obviously had things like damage, gaining right of way, and all the rest of it. So I'll slowly go through each of these in turn and figure out how they apply. As usual, stop me at any point if things are confusing, and I'll keep an eye on the chat window as well. Just put that up where I can see it. So if you also want to ask me a question, feel free to either come off mute and just ask me, or fire it in that chat window. So if we go through the scenario then, position by position. So if we look at position 1 first of all, so before anything has happened, blue is clear astern of yellow. Hopefully everyone's comfortable with that. If I drew a dotted line from the back point of yellow, blue would be behind it, so blue is clear astern, and they're both on the same tack. So right-of-way rules that apply, boat that's clear astern has to keep clear, so blue has to keep clear. So hopefully everybody's happy enough so far. Then position 2, blue now gets an overlap from clear astern to leeward of yellow. So now we have a change in the right-of-way rules. So now the windward boat is going to be the boat that has to keep clear. That's going to be yellow, and that's rule number 11. So hopefully that's familiar to you as well. We can also then say, well, blue is going to be the right-of-way boat. So if she changes course, which is what we're going to get onto in the next position, she'll have to give yellow room to keep clear. So we can anticipate that first of all. I haven't written it in the in here, but you could also have applied rule 15 because she gains right-of-way. So we can talk about that as well. Because the overlap came from clear astern, from blue, so blue got the overlap within 2 hull lengths of yellow to leeward of her, and from clear astern, this rule 17 now applies. So the rule that obliges yellow to not sail above her proper course. So that now applies. Something I want to just point out, because I think it confused a couple of people. This is a separate rule to the right-of-way rules. So you have 4 main right-of-way rules: port starboard, windward leeward, clear ahead, clear astern, and while tacking. So these are the only 4 right-of-way rules that there are, and they always will apply. The getting the overlap to leeward, in this case, means that blue is now the right-of-way boat because she's to leeward. The extra obligation that blue has is to not sail above her proper course. That does not change the right-of-way. So yellow still has to keep clear throughout this incident. The fact that blue cannot sail above her proper course doesn't change that. So hopefully that is clear. So in this case, both boats have got obligations. Yellow is to keep clear, blue cannot sail above her proper course. Hopefully that is all making some sense. Then in position 3, we need a bit more information to figure out how the rules are going to apply there. So we've talked about the main rules setting up the incident. Now if we look back at the text that was provided, we can then decide whether those rules we've talked about were broken or not. So there's loads of words in this one. So this is kind of replicating what the parties would be telling you in the room. So normally you wouldn't get so much text if this was a protest hearing, but this is what the parties would be saying to the protest committee. And I've underlined here and put in red the things that I think are like the key words that would tell me which boat has not fulfilled its obligation. So We've got things like suddenly blue horizon left up, before we had time to react. So this is from yellow. She says before she had time to react, there was contact. Whereas blue said, we broached, we were out of control, couldn't do anything. And within that, and within seconds of the gust hitting us, we hit yellow peril. So we've got some information that blue horizon's course change was sudden, that it was before yellow had time to react. It was due to blue being out of control, and it happened within seconds. So there's some information there. We can then go back and decide how the rules would, given what rules applied, which boat actually broke them. So hopefully, well, everybody did apply them this way, actually. Everyone came up with the same answer. So as I said, obligations are, before we answer that, yellow has to keep clear, blue cannot sail above her proper course, and if she changes course, she has to give yellow room to keep clear. So everybody agreed based on that. Blue's, so we were told blue left, seconds later there was contact, and everyone concluded from that blue did not give yellow room to keep clear. So that blue's luff was too quick, yellow did not have enough room to keep clear. She also hopefully concluded that blue sailed above her proper course. So we've got direction to the next mark. Blue has sailed above that, clearly, so she's broken that rule. Yellow has not kept clear. So if we went back to our definition of keep clear, would yellow be keeping clear in position 3? The answer is going to be no. But because she was compelled to, she was forced into that position by blue's maneuver, she can be exonerated. And a number of you mentioned that, which is quite correct. It wouldn't be wrong to have written the other decision. It would just be on the basis of the facts that you pull out, and you would decide which applies. So we tried to write a scenario that it makes it quite clear what the outcome should be, but it wouldn't have been wrong to say
Chris,
that yellow hadn't had enough.
Could you explain that last bit again, please?
Yes, of course. The whole bit of position 3.
Yeah, just your last few sentences about yellow not being able to keep clear.
So this will be a balancing act. So when these two boats come into the room, so if you imagine you're the protest committee having to decide this, you'll have to decide, did yellow keep clear, and did blue give enough room to keep clear? And it's conceivable, depending on what the parties said, you might decide yellow hasn't complied with our obligations or blue hasn't complied with our obligations. And all I was kind of saying was, we wrote a deliberately clear scenario where we put in all these words suddenly and within seconds to try and lead you to the right answer. But in reality, it wouldn't be wrong to have written the other scenario. It would just be based on how you view those facts, if that makes some sense. Kind of hard because this is like a kind of scenario where we all want everyone to kind of more or less come to the same conclusion. But in real life, it probably wouldn't be as clear as that. Hope that makes some sense, Robin. Is that okay? Good, okay. So, some of you then mentioned as being out of control relevant. That was sort of put in there. And we've also been reinforcing, hopefully as the weeks have gone on, that the cases can be really useful for determining this kind of thing. There were loads of cases that could have applied. I've pulled out a few that I thought were kind of useful, but there's others that are relevant as well. So to answer the question, is being out of control relevant? So Blue in her defense has said, well, I was out of control. There was a big gust, we broached. There's nothing I could have done. Does that get her off the hook? Hopefully you've come to the conclusion the answer to that is no. If we look at some of the cases, we've got one world sailing case that tells us that we are to assume that the helm has got a reasonable competency. So we expect the sailing from a reasonably competent helm, and that we wouldn't expect them to be experts at sailing. But that we have another case that then goes on to say, well, if you break a rule and because you're out of control, that's not a reason for exoneration. So those two together can kind of see when we, as a protest committee, decide whether we complied with our obligations, we wouldn't take into account that she was out of control. That's something that Blue herself would have had to have anticipated. So by that, I mean, if you know you're not a particularly confident sailor in those conditions, you're going to have to give more room and stay further away from yellow in order to not break those rules. So that was a bit of a red herring. It's put in there to distract you. It's not relevant to the actual decision. Per boat handling does not get you off the hook. Good. So then, having decided the main right-of-way rules, how they apply, we've also got some damage that's mentioned. So this bit can be kind of complicated, so I'll try and go through this relatively slowly. So first of all, to decide, I mean, the actual text used the word damage, but how would you decide if it was damage? So yellow parallel has said there was some damage to the chain plate and bottle screw, and Blue Horizon said there was some damage to the starboard side, and the forestay seemed a bit soft. So first of all, what is damage? We've mentioned before, there's a nice RYA case which addresses this. There's no definition in the actual rules, but in this case, they say it's something a prudent boat owner would repair promptly. So this is something that if it happened to you when you're on the water, would you try and get it sorted out pretty quickly? Yeah, and hopefully conclude the answer to this is yes, these would both be damage. And in fact, in our case, both the boats were tired because of the damage. So hopefully that's relatively clear, there was damage. For this scenario, we don't have to decide whether it was serious damage. For some incidents we do. In this case, only that there is damage is important. And then we have this rule 14 that we keep mentioning as well, about avoiding contact. So if we think about how that applies, I think everybody more or less got this right actually, which is good. But the way the rule is written is quite concise, but it can be quite confusing if you don't sort of break it down. So this rule applies all of the time and it never switches off, and it applies to every boat. So you must avoid contact is basically what this rule is telling you. A boat shall avoid contact with another boat if reasonably possible. So that applies to everybody. You always have an obligation to avoid contact if reasonably possible. Then it goes on to say if you're a right-of-way boat or one that's entitled to room or mark room, so in this case, blue would be our right-of-way boat, and yellow would be the one that's entitled to room from blue when she changes course. So the right-of-way boat need not act to avoid contact until it's clear the other boat is not keeping clear or giving room, fine. And then part B, shall be exonerated if she breaks the rule and this does not cause damage or injury. So how would we apply that to blue and yellow in our scenarios? So blue obviously did not avoid contact because there was contact. So that part of the rule, we can conclude that there was contact. She was the right-of-way boat, we've established, because rule 11 applied. She was leeward, so she's right-of-way. But because the contact caused damage, she cannot be exonerated. So this second part, where it says you'd be exonerated if you were the right-of-way boat and there's no damage, that part does not apply because there was. So she broke rule 14. Okay. Yellow peril, on the other hand, also did not avoid contact because there was contact. And then for her, we'd be asking, well, was it reasonably possible, given what we've already decided about this scenario, and that the luff was sudden and all the rest of it? Was it reasonably possible? And I think probably you would conclude it wasn't. But you can see how the protest committee would decide that. I think probably you would decide it was not reasonably possible. So we would conclude she did not break rule 14. So that overall would give us then, when we write up our decision, the yellow peril broke rule 11. She didn't keep clear of the swimmer boat, but she was compelled to, and she didn't break rule 14. Many of you spotted she retired because of damage, so she'd be entitled to redress. And because of that, we can talk more about that in a minute. Blue Horizon, on the other hand, has broken a whole lot of rules. She's not given room when she changed course. She broke rule 17 because she sailed above her proper course, and she broke rule 14 by causing contact with damage. So she's dead 3 different ways. However, she also retired, so we would not be further penalizing her. First of all, before I get on to what I've just put at the bottom there, that's the end of what I would have answered. Does anybody want to ask any questions about that so far, or ask me to clarify anything?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question.
First, yeah, Robin, hi.
I don't think yellow apparel were keeping a proper lookout. They made no effort to turn away. You know, I'm just going on the 3 pictures, okay? So she's just carrying on. I mean, I've been in that scenario many a time, and you've got somebody looking at that boat, the lured boat, the whole time to make sure that she's doing what she ought to do, and that if she doesn't, well then we have to react. I can see I can see no way that Yellow Peril were keeping a proper lookout, because they would have put the helm over immediately.
Mm-hmm.
They saw blue coming up towards them, in my opinion.
Anybody else like to comment?
It's a tricky one. I mean, when you're umpiring, then you can see the keep clear boat attempt to make a prompt response, and if that prompt response is unseamanlike and there's still a failure to keep clear, then clearly room wasn't given. But yeah, in this case, when the boat doesn't respond in any prompt fashion at all, they're certainly putting themselves at risk of, well, not at risk, but of that kind of case being made, that they didn't respond, and therefore that they are at least a part to blame.
Can I make a comment on that? Or can I ask a question? Space needed, we often used to talk about, was it time and space? These are cruisers sailing under spinnaker, so got several people. What is the reaction time that you allow? And in heavy weather, you don't just push the helm down. You warn your crew, because they might have to do something. You know, somebody will want to have a hand on the kicking strap. Somebody will be on the main sheet. Somebody will be on the spinnaker sheet. And if you try to luff you and maintain control, or they all need to act. So there's a second or two or three before you do anything. And the point here is that you don't, if we look at section 2, is yellow keeping clear? That's position 2.
Yes.
Okay, so she only has to start doing something at the moment that it becomes clear that blue is not giving, it has changed course and is not going to give her room. Okay.
Can I just put in a point here about the diagram doesn't actually tally with what was said in the case, because, or in the reports, because from the diagrams it's quite clear that Yellow Peril is flying a spinnaker, whereas in the case, in the report, they said they'd already dropped the spinnaker at that point.
Did it?
Yes, they were sailing. I think they were sailing without a spinnaker, because they'd broached several times.
Happy to go back and have a look. I could be wrong.
Not aware of that.
No, we were carrying the spinnaker without too much difficulty.
All right, yes, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything else from anybody? Yeah.
I'm muted.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, I understand exactly what Gordon is saying, because I've been racing on 38-footer and 40-foot cruisers most of my time, and we've had this scenario, and the helm goes over and he shouts to everybody, and it all just happens immediately. It only takes a couple of seconds to let them in off, because they're all there in control, and it doesn't matter if they don't. We have made the effort to get out of the way. We can say the helm went hard over, but because the way the boat was trimmed, it didn't react.
Is that not at the risk to the safety of your own crew? That's quite a dangerous manoeuvre, to my mind, to just throw the helm straight over on a windy spinnaker leg.
All right, okay, fine.
Al, did you want to ask something first of all?
Yeah. Yes, my view is that the Rule 17 is there to protect the boat that is sailing along and having a boat overhauling them, and the whole idea of luffing rights. And so if you're implying that the right of one, it's not a right of way boat, it's still a give way boat, but if you're saying that they have to ignore Rule 17, then that's not correct. So I personally think, and I also think that within one boat length, and it's an interesting point made earlier, if the Blue Peril is aware that they are not really under control properly, it should be their responsibility to create a bit more room by bearing away, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're going to come to that in the DNA discussion, I think, because I tend to agree.
With that, I promise.
I honestly think the key point is that when you change course, that you have to the rule 16 that include the time the room you need includes reaction time, and even if the helm does put the helm down, it won't be immediately. There'll be a second. Sorry, if you go back to the famous things about the reaction time when you're driving, and look at that, people don't react instantaneously. They have to have time to react. So, and in this case, I don't. My argument would be that blue did not give yellow time to react.
Yeah, I think one of them described it as an immediate contact after the broach.
I had a situation some years back sailing on a cruiser about in the round the island race, which as you round the Isle of Wight race, which is very busy, and we had exactly the situation, and we were aware that we had a boat to leeward, and we were watching it the whole time, but we had a boat to windward of us as well, so we just carried on. And when the boat to leeward broached, and she did broach, she was in our cockpit so fast we didn't have time to do anything apart from try and fend her off. She was just there. It happened in a second.
And the other point is that a long time ago, when men were men and boats were made of wood, you did not have to give the windward boat room. And so there was all sorts of, I mean, we used to have a code word for when we were leeward boat and the helmsman was going to luff, because you were allowed to go and try and surprise the windward boat. That was taken out of sailing definitively when they decided in the late 90s that sailing was going to become a non-contact sport. So
I think that, I mean, as I say, it's very difficult in this exact case because you're trying to infer how the rules imply from just writing. In reality, you would be able to ask, if you've been dragged from the bar to hear this protest between blue and yellow, you'd be able to ask them more about what had happened. So you probably would have arrived at your conclusion with a bit more certainty. You can also probably ask the crew as witnesses, if they're available, what they actually did to try and maneuver the boat in yellow's case to keep clear. That would give you an indication of maybe how much time they had, that kind of thing. But it's one of those incidents that can go quite easily one way or the other, just depending on what the parties say. So there's good points on both sides. Is everybody happy with that?
Can you ask for witnesses off the same boat? I was under the impression that can you ask for a witness off the same boat in a hearing? I was under the impression that the person that was there as the protester or the protestee was taken as the definitive word from the boat. No?
You could ask, I mean, yeah, you can bring witnesses from your own boat. Often they're just going to tell you exactly what the parties say. But in this case, maybe something like the bowman might be able to tell you a bit about what he was able to do to maneuver the boat that the helm maybe wouldn't be able to tell you. So like it just depends on what the incident was. But you could definitely have people from the same boat.
It is surprising how often when the witness comes from the same boat that they contradict or tell a different story. I mean, it's because they've seen something from a different angle, and they were looking for something different. So it can be very useful to have a witness from the same boat. If he says exactly the same story as the person who was representing the boat, well, do we take that much account of it? It reinforces what was said, but that's when he contradicts what was said, then we are very interested.
Because of course the witness hasn't been in the room when the two parties have said what happened. The witness will have been outside, so they won't know what.
I think what you're thinking about is that the boat can only be represented by one person at a time. So there is the party the person representing the boat has a right to be present during the hearing, all the hearing, including the witnesses, but only one person. So you sometimes see people trying to come in, 3 or 4 people trying to come in from the same boat to hear for the protest. No, one person can come in to represent the boat. The others can be called in as witnesses, but they will only be there while they are giving their statement.
Okay. So we can maybe move on to something that some people, I think 1 or 2 people wrote in their answers, and they also that Blue had not competed in compliance with the rules of good sportsmanship. So remember last week we talked about not going for rule 2. Some people did that this week, and I'm wondering whether anybody else has any opinions on whether you would in this scenario go for rule 2 as well as the other rules.
I wouldn't. I don't think that there's, it's a race. You make the boat go as fast as you can. And it's not, you're right on the edge some of the time. And that's not bad sportsmanship. You're not, it's different if you luff up into them deliberately. For example, if you're trying to affect their result in a series and you want them to retire. But, you're out there on a windy day going as fast as you can. That's not bad sportsmanship in my view.
Anybody else?
Yes, I agree with Liam entirely.
So I wasn't sure whether it was about sportsmanship or not, but I certainly raised the question of whether a DNA would be appropriate in this situation. Given in the evidence, Yellow clearly predicted that a broach was likely. And the measure is a competent but not expert crew. Therefore, really, Blue should have been in the same position of predicting that a broach was likely. And in the manner in which they chose to overtake Yellow, they placed both boats in a situation that resulted in them both retiring with concerns that their rigs were going to drop. To me, boats retiring because rigs are going to drop is serious damage. So you have a boat that's put 2 competitors at risk of serious damage, and that for me is a more serious incident than just windward leeward.
Actually, just about this whole scenario, neither boat said that they hailed or had any communication with the other boat. I know that as crew boss on these boats that I raced on, I'd be there at the back and I'd be shouting at Blue, "You make sure you keep clear and don't you sail above your course."
Yeah.
And if there was a boat to a windward of me, I'd be shouting at him, "You make sure that you keep clear, and if you see us changing, move."
Yeah.
So, as they say in Dublin Bay, he who shouts loudest normally wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's only 2 words required in the rules, and one of them is protest. I think the other one is rude.
Yeah, room to tag, I think is the other one, isn't it? Yeah.
Room to tag's not actually required.
Sorry, negative to room to tag. An expression equivalent to room to tag will be accepted. The other one is view tag.
Yes, it's that word.
It's the response. Sorry.
I think it can actually be really quite useful though, because obviously, so nothing obliges you to shout, "Oh, you need to keep clear," or "Don't sail proper course," or whatever. But I would be more convinced that you had acted to avoid contact if you had been shouting at the time. That would be something that I might take into account. So this rule about avoiding contact. So it just says a boat shall avoid contact, and it uses the words "need not act to avoid contact." So I would consider shouting to be an action. So that would be something that might get you off the hook if you're able to say, "Well, I was shouting at him and I was making him aware of what was about to happen."
It does at least prove you're keeping a lookout.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, as long as it's not aggressive or intimidating or anything. So.
Conversely, could you argue that as Blue Horizon is the right-of-way boat, that Yellow should have been aware that there was a risk of broaching and should have gone up a little bit to give him room in case he did broach. I know he's not required to anticipate any change of course, but it seems to me, if I was yellow in my boat, and this guy is weaving down towards us at speed, I'd be intent to keep out of his way.
So there's two
Might be
things there.
prudent, but it's not required.
And prudent,
There's
exactly.
two things there. He's not required to take any action when he's actually right-of-way boat,
Yep.
or when he's in front, and then how far is it from when the overlap is established to when the incident occurred? It's only on the diagram 3 boat lengths. So yes, I mean, there is the requirement there in terms of no fault for yellow to establish a safe position. But do they actually have opportunity to do that, even with prompt action?
Can I ask a question, Chris?
Of course, yeah.
If yellow sustained serious damage and blue didn't, and blue continued on and competed the race and got a result, and then if yellow protested blue, at the time of the incident, because there was such serious damage caused and such confusion, yellow failed to fly a protest flag. It then went to the protest committee and they accepted it didn't fly a flag because of the situation. But if blue accepted that the situation did occur and because there was damage, would the protest committee be able to allow the protest to be heard, or do they have to put it out because there's no flag flown?
I could see frantic searching of the rulebook when he said that. The answer, I think, is yes. So if there is, I think the rule says, if there is damage that's obvious to both boats at the time of the incident, then there's no need for the hail and no need for the flag.
It is actually, if there is injury or serious damage that is obvious to the boat intending to protest, the requirements of this rule do not apply. So, right. So if it's obvious to the boat that's intending to protest that they've got a hole in the boat, they don't have to fly a flag.
But then it comes down to serious damage, doesn't it? I mean, if
no, that's on the requirement to show the flag. So the protest would be valid.
Sorry, but it's down to serious damage, is it not? No.
No, if there's injury or serious damage, there's obvious to the boat intending to protest. A hole in a boat is a serious damage.
So that's serious damage, like you're saying, a hole in the boat. But if it was just a banged up, dinged up gunnel and
yeah, well.
So anyway, the protest committee has a right to hear it then on the basis of that.
Yeah, so you would be asking, well, what did you think had happened at the time of the incident? What was the damage? Blah 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 blah. Oftentimes the damage might not be something so obvious. Might be like internal damage or something. You're not aware of it until afterwards. But at the time, what would be the difference between damage and serious damage? So if Gordon's quoted that it's got to be serious damage, what's the difference in your minds between damage? What's just damage? So we said damage was something a prudent boat owner would repair promptly, and what's the difference between that and serious damage?
Would it not be something that
if it
continuing to race
higher, then it is definitely serious damage.
Yeah, I think so.
It's serious damage when it's my boat.
We had an interesting discussion. If, for instance, the push pit or the pull pit is damaged, so that the safety lines are no longer correctly filling their function, is that serious damage? And we came to the conclusion, yes, because the boat is no longer fulfilling the safety regulations, so it technically has to retire. It's out of the race.
Yeah.
It prevents the boat, if they follow the rules, which they should do, prevents the boat from completing the race.
Yeah. Would that be the threshold for serious damage if you can't race on in any form?
I think the I think the RYA definition is the closest we will get.
Yeah, and I think that is what it says basically. That if it is something that affects your ability to safely sail, then yes, that would be serious damage. I think all of us would be probably be happy with that. If you think the rig is going to come down or something, then that would be serious. Yeah.
One of the cases mentioned that if it affected the value of the boats substantially, that would be serious damage. Now the boat might sail on, but
yeah. So these are sorry, go ahead.
What about if it had affected your ability to race? So, for example, the boat in front of you broaches and tears your only spinnaker, not affecting your ability to sail. It's not a safety issue, but it's going to slow you down quite considerably. Would that be considered serious damage?
There are 3 types of damage in the rule book, and that will be damage that might give you redress, and it might be sufficiently serious for the other boat to have to retire, the infringing boat. So you can get redress if the damage is serious enough to significantly make your score, your race result worse. And you could argue that losing a spinnaker halfway through a race might make your race result worse. However, the next question is, can this, if that happens, is it serious enough so that the boat that damaged your spinnaker cannot take a turn? And as far as I can see, and then you also get the mention of damage in Rule 14. And the levels are slightly different in each of them. So damage is an interesting question that causes a lot of discussion. And world sailing has always been very cagey about giving really clearly defined answers to the question, what is damage and what is serious damage?
There's mud, huh?
After a protest hearing, and a yellow was found to be in the wrong, and they have caused serious damage to. Sorry, blue was found to be in the wrong, and they caused serious damage to yellow. And thereafter, blue refuses to pay for that damage. What is open to yellow to? I mean, they've had their hearing and they've had the result, but there's no further way of kind of chasing that boat down other than, I presume, a personal civil case.
Well, is the refusal a second incident?
If they refuse, if they don't pay, if they're not willing to pay the damage, then they just don't pay for the damage. They won't pay for the damage. There's nothing in the rules that covers that. There's nothing in the protest that covers that. So I think it's just down to have to chase them on a civil matter.
But serious damage and it's costing that much money, is it not insurance company's problem then?
Yeah, your first stop will be the insurance company.
That's irrelevant then.
No, sorry, this is something actually that happened to me. Someone didn't pay for me. I found out that under Lloyd's insurance, under boat insurance, you can't actually go after them like you can car insurance. You can't submit an insurance claim, and you can't submit a protest hearing as evidence of that insurance claim. Because I think it goes back historically that Lloyd's were insuring boats all around the world. They couldn't be going around the world to follow up the cases. So what they say is you would have to take a civil action against the owner of the boat. The owner of the boat can claim off his insurance if he pays out, but you can't claim off his insurance as the other party.
I think the general consensus is that we, as on the protest committee, decide whether a sporting rule has been broken. That can be presented as evidence to your insurance company and the two parties, but many countries have prescriptions which say that any of action under that is under the jurisdiction of the courts, not of the protest committee. All we do is decide whether a rule has been broken.
But often that is accepted by the courts. Yeah. So the courts will accept that you were both racing under the racing rules of sailing, and the protest committee had the right to decide who broke a rule, and they concluded it was blue, and they will accept that. They won't do any further fact finding. That has happened before.
But you have to go to court.
Yeah. The protest committee has no right to assign damages to people, so we can't order so-and-so to pay, all we can do is disqualify. The worst thing we can do is disqualify you from the event. That's basically it in terms of our ability. You'd have to go to court to get any money back.
It might be somewhat different if it transpired that the boat was not insured, because in general, to enter the race, they have to say that they have proper insurance. So there is a question of misconduct, but that's a special case. If it's just the insurance company who won't pay out, that's a different point. I understand there are some insurance companies that just say, well, they were racing, so it's 50-50.
Yeah, my understanding, Gordon, is you can't actually claim off the insurance like you can claim off car insurance. You have to claim off the owner, and the owner is the only person who claims his own boat insurance.
Yep.
So in that scenario, could you go back under a Rule 69? Could you say he won't pay for damage and claim and looking to charge him Rule 69?
I'm not sure. It would be an interesting case that we'd have to examine. As I say, if they've actually told an untruth in there when registering for the event, that would be considered misconduct. Could be considered misconduct.
No, the case is that they had full insurance, so no question about that.
Okay, well,
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's the courts.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, so just before we get off misconduct, but if we go back to the actual scenario, so to the Rule 2 question, which I don't know if I ever properly answered, because some people did bring it up, and I would say like what was said about it was correct there before we moved on. When I read the scenario, it wasn't really in my head, but I think if you were happy that Blue had knowingly put herself into a situation that was going to be unsafe, I think there is probably an argument you could get to saying that she broke the rules of good sportsmanship. But one of the things about Rule 2, if you look at it in the rule book, it says at the end of the rule, it says you can't penalise a boat under this rule unless it's clearly established that she broke the rules of good sportsmanship. So it's not quite the same as, normally we go in the balance of probabilities, so 50-50, blah, blah, blah. But with Rule 2, the bar is a bit higher. So I think in this case, I would need a bit more, I'd need quite a bit of evidence to satisfy myself anyway, that Rule 2 had been broken. And because of the nature of the incident is one that Blue could feasibly think she was in the right, she lost control and she could think it's not one where she maybe knew she'd broken a rule and should have done something about it. In any case, she retired. But certainly the logic is sound, I think. I don't know what Gordon and Gemma think about that as well.
Just so, there is a wording in case 138, which basically says if an action that directly affects the fairness of the competition or failing to take an appropriate penalty when the competitor is aware of breaking a rule should be considered under Rule 2. And one of the different actions that could be examples of misconduct is acting recklessly or in a manner that does or is likely to cause damage or injury. So in this case, that will be what we were looking at. What is sailing hard? When does sailing hard in tough conditions become acting recklessly?
There's a slight difference, in my opinion, between the Rule 69 criteria as outlined in case 138, and if you go to the misconduct guidelines, there is now, and in the end, in Appendix F, what are the principles of sportsmanship? Then there's some common ground, but there's some differences. Okay, so it's a little bit softer, but it is there. Reckless sailing likely to result in damage or injury. It is there. But so there's a slight difference.
In that regard, about say Blue had wiped out a handful of times on the way down the run initially,
Yeah.
and then got overlapped in there. Would that be, an indication that it was reckless?
It would depend on what the evidence is provided.
Does it have to be reckless? Surely, even if it's expert, that's above the measure that we're supposed to consider. It's only competent sailing that we're to consider.
With all these principles and all these things, you get into these gray areas where you go back to the normal definition of the word, and then if you haven't looked at them before, you suddenly find that it's not cutting so fine as to decide, is this above a competent crew or not? And sometimes it makes the threshold that it requires is a little bit higher. So and there's a reason for that. In general, it's very difficult to get into these arguments with a clear-cut answer to a question.
If something has to be clearly established, if you have a doubt about it, it's not clearly established. Yeah. So if reckless sailing, you have to be really, really clear about it.
Yeah. So in this case, you had a boat that predicted it and a boat that did it.
Yeah. But I can go in there and say, oh, I saw this guy, broaching 17 times before he caught up with me, and then I didn't keep up with it. But in itself, is that reckless? All it says is what's happened in the past history, but we, at that moment in time, it might not have been. The reason for the broach could be a number of reasons. It could have been the wind, but it could have been that he couldn't let go of he got a turning knot on the sheet suddenly and couldn't let go. On the other hand, someone might be an expert and arrive to a position where decides, I tell you what, I'm gonna scare it, I'm gonna do a luff, and then it gets out of control. So the point is never that clear as she.
If he's broached a number of times coming down the run, he's most unlikely to catch you.
Well, that's a different. I agree, but that's a different point.
and both boats were flying spinnakers and pointing at the mark. So I think it would be very difficult to say that this was bad sportsmanship. If he was the only boat flying a spinnaker, because everybody else had decided it was too windy, and he had broached once or twice coming down the run, or they're on a reach, I think you could possibly argue that. But I think if they're all flying spinnakers and he broaches, that's unlikely to meet the definition of bad sportsmanship.
I'm going to make one final stab at being a bollocks.
No.
And that's to say that the general intent of the rules throughout almost is to avoid collision and as a result injury. And that's clearly not what happened here.
I think that is clearly governed. Well, sorry, in that particular case, the governance to the avoidance of collisions falls under Rule 14, and we go back to reasonably reasonably possible to avoid contact or not.
For yellow.
Yes. Well, let's assume for blue as well, but for both of them, because blue broaches, and can he do something to avoid collision? Could have done anything further. Can he properly let go of the sheet and even put the tiller further and luff even more earlier to avoid the contact with the boat? I don't know. You know yourself.
Hopefully that's nice and clear.
My point is, it's never clear. It's never simple and clear, and you're going to get in this.
But hopefully you kind of see how we would think through it, even if it's not. I mean, I don't really know what the answer is, yes or no. It would depend on the scenario. But you can kind of see the logic we would be using to decide if Rule 2 applied or not. Anyway, time is marching on. Does anybody else have any other questions about this scenario that we haven't covered?
I take it that Yellow Pearl would be entitled to redress?
Yes. So in this scenario, it said Yellow Pearl had to retire. So we would be, considering some redress for her. Presumably, you didn't have enough information to know whether she was able to repair the damage and get sailing for the rest of the series or something. But that's something to bear in mind, absolutely. Yeah. I think I give a point for that as well.
Could you submit a if you're a yellow peril? Could you submit a protest and a request for redress? How does it work? Or is it just one or the other?
If you submit only a request for redress, so if you write on your form just that your score, so you don't mention really what Blue Horizon did, you just say you want redress, then that would be, the only thing that would happen is you would get redress, possibly. So Blue Horizon would not be disqualified. Even if we decided in that hearing, Blue Horizon broke a rule, because it's a request for redress only, and Blue Horizon's not been protested, she would just walk away scot-free, if that makes sense. If you protest as well and request redress, then we could disqualify Blue Horizon. That's essentially the difference.
It does happen that as Blue retired, in order to give redress, all we have to do is be satisfied that the damage was due to or the score was made worse,
possibly made worse,
by the actions of due to damage
of an
due
incident
to a boat breaking a rule of Part 2. Once it's established that the other boat has broken a rule of Part 2, we don't actually need a protest. And so in some cases we have it's done as a request for redress. And so if for instance, the boat that retired, the boat that broke a rule, actually says, I retired because I was on port and I hit boat on starboard, for instance. Is that enough for us to establish that the damage was due to the boat?
As a competitor, would it not make sense as a competitor just to tick both boxes in the form to say this is a protest and that's for redress?
Yeah. Usually when it happens, in my experience, it usually happens because the two are friends or something and they don't want to get the other disqualified, they just want redress. And that's perfectly fine if that's what they want.
We've used it in forms of sailing, like radio sailing, where you want to get the issue solved very quickly, for instance. And so, yes, there's damage. I need another grounds for redress. The boat has admitted that he broke the rule. It's a bit unconventional, but it is technically possible. But it's much better to have a protest.
Any other questions? Okie doke. Just before I am going to hand over to Gordon in a second to explain next week's task. This is the kind of answer sheet that I used to mark it. So as usual, this will go on the website so you can see and you can disagree with my marking if you like. But that's all of what I was written to get the points. And then this is our leaderboard so far. Again, I think this is being recorded so you can look it up later. Very close at the top. So stay with it. Definitely, we're really encouraged. And I can see everyone's score getting better as the weeks have been going, which is great as well. So well done on that front. So,
Chris, can I just ask a question, please? My name, I don't have any score on the case 5.
All right.
I definitely sent it in to you.
Oh, okay. Can you send it again, just in case it's gone missing?
I will do, yeah.
Thank you. And I'll do that. No problem. Wonderful.
Did you send it to the email address, Liam?
I did, yes. Yes, I did.
Okay. I don't see
it. It's quite possible we've missed it, to be honest.
No, I'm looking at it right now, and I don't.
I think I have my email open in front of me. I do. I'll just log in and see will it let me. And I'll
just send it again, and we'll chase that.
Yeah, I definitely don't see it in the inbox. So.
So I'm going to hand over to Gordon.
Liam Lynch.
Talk a bit about next week's task. Let's go this up into it.
Okay.
No, that's
we're going to do something slightly.
I'll send it on to you again. I have it written out anyway, Sima.
Slightly different for